recording another background for this animal study that we did. So I've got some of these photos, my actual reference, and then some of these lizards in more natural habitats. So the first thing that I'm going to do here is create kind of a ground line. It's got to go underneath, or I'm sorry, it's got to go above where the animal is sitting, and that includes the tail for this animal, since this animal would have its tail dragging on the ground. It would stop if I wanted to kind of appear as if it's kind of natural like this. That ground would then kind of disappear behind the animal's head. So I could adjust that and play with that a little bit. But let's say that that's sort of a rock that he's sitting on. For this background, I'm doing one that's going to be a little more abstract. We're going to do a drip technique that then you could add a Zentangle design to, let's say. So I'm going to be using watercolor though, and I realized that something that could help me out with this would be using a resist method. Since this is for Art 1, I don't necessarily have a lot of really sophisticated resists that I can have the whole class use, but we do have this clear oil pastel. So I'm just going to use this to go over this entire pen drawing, and this is actually a photocopy of my original drawing, so I don't have to worry about messing it up. I should actually right now, before I even do anything else, I'm going to actually flip this over and put my name on the back, and since this is for Art 1, you would put whatever bell you were in, lower right hand corner there. So this is going to be too wet to do that at the end. I also have it on a piece of cardboard, which I can just pick up and move the whole cardboard piece to the drying rack. All right, so picking up from where I left off, I'm just applying this clear oil pastel everywhere. I'm applying it really, really carefully to these edges. If you want to get a little bit more of a point on this, you could shave this down using maybe a knife, or using, in this case, I'm just using this toothpick to kind of shave it sort of into kind of like almost a lipstick shape is what I'm going for. But I'm just going to try to do my best with basically what I have. And I'm just kind of using that somewhat pointy part along the edge. So I'm just trying my best to fill this in. I'm going to do the inside too, but really trying hard to make it nice and precise along the edge. So the oil in the oil pastel resists the water in the watercolor. So what I'm going for here is going to be a watercolor wash background where I don't have to worry quite so much about messing up the edges. I was also finding that the paper would kind of have a bleed effect, where even if I was really precise with my edges, the water might kind of seep into the paper and kind of blur those edges otherwise and get on the animal. So this can be just a nice technique to prevent that. So we're going to leave the animal, in this case, just totally just a plain white line drawing or contour drawing with just the basic lines done in ink. So this works over an ink drawing, or in this case, we've actually made a photocopy of our inked sketch. So again, that way we don't have to worry too much about whether we're going to mess this up. Okay, so I think I got all of this, the edges really nicely, and also the interior of the animal. It does have a little bit of a yellowish look to it in person, just really, really, really subtle. So that might help you tell for sure that you really got everywhere. But it is very, very subtle. It's pretty much clear. All right. So because we've got that resist, I don't have to be quite so careful when I apply the watercolor for my wash. Notice I've already mixed up a color here on the mixing area, the palette of my watercolors. I've got some pieces of paper towel already ripped up, so I'm going to be ready to go to fix any mistakes. So I'm going to start with my large brush, and I can apply this quickly. So I'm just using a plain water right now. You might see a little bit of a hint of color because I've been doing a few paintings with this same water. But just really quickly getting the water down onto this whole lower area. And not worrying too much about right around the edges, but if I do kind of make a mistake with the large brush, it shouldn't be a problem. So now I can get in there with a smaller brush, and I'm going to be kind of careful, but because we've got the oil pastel on here, if I make a mistake or I'm just going a little bit faster, it shouldn't really be an issue. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to start just applying this color. And you can see, like right here, I must have gone a little bit over the line and it is resisting. So just kind of dabbing in this color, getting as close up to this animal as I can. And if you're really persistent and get some really heavy color, you could probably still go over some of those edges where you, even though I got the oil pastel a little bit over the line, if I get a lot of color on there, I can still go over that oil pastel, but it has to be a lot of color. If it's mixed with the water, then the oil will resist the water. So in here, I'm just getting right up close and making sure that I paint up to the area where I've got the water already. So I'm going to do that kind of quickly in here. I don't want to create any kind of like hard lines where you can see the edge of this color, which will happen if it dries. So see there, you can kind of see where it was starting to dry quickly. So I want to make sure that I put lots of color there to make sure that I go over that and you can't see that. And I can continue adding more color, spreading that around with more water as the paper starts to dry a bit. So I'm working pretty quickly, even though I'm working carefully, to make sure that we don't have this pigment start to dry where we don't want it to dry, and to create kind of these harsh boundaries. We want this whole area down here to just flow together. And because we have put that oil pastel on, I can do this faster without having to be maybe quite so careful. But I'm still trying to be pretty careful. Okay, just spreading this around because the water is starting to dry a little bit. And I'm mixing up more color right from the pans of color. The wetter that gets and the more of the actual pigment I pick up on my brush, then the richer the color will be. So I tried to get a lot of that actual rich color on my brush to get this a really, really nice dark contrast right around the animal. And again, if I'm using a lot of the pigment, then I can actually even go over areas where I might have gotten a little bit sloppy with the oil pastel. So I can get right up into those little details. And now I'm just adding with my large brush, just spreading out all this color and water. And again, if I want to create a little bit more of a blend in some of these areas between areas that had some really kind of thicker color going into them, and then the areas where the water was kind of taking over more and it got a little bit lighter. So I'm getting a lot of pigment on my brush to get maybe a little bit closer into some of these areas, especially ones where I've got too much oil on the paper and went outside those lines where I was trying to get the oil. All right, but I've done a pretty good job now spreading this around. So I'm going to create this kind of abstract look to the top. So I'm going to create a drip effect here. I want it to kind of create smaller segments. So I'm actually going to extend some of this watery area so that I can have my drips crisscrossing. And I'm going to put plenty of water and pigment, especially right along the edges here. Now getting this to lift maybe, okay, good. It wasn't too hard. So I'm actually angling that, and I'm going to encourage some drips, so I might have to start them. So this is the effect I want. So if I do have any of that water going too out of control and onto the animal, it shouldn't be too much of a problem because I've got the oil pastel covering the animal there. So adding more of this. So what we've done with these in the past is purposely create these drips that we can then do some different Zentangling in. So I thought that might be kind of fun with the background. We want to do some backgrounds that aren't quite as realistically inspired. All right, so you'll notice I am getting some oil pastel crossing the animal. So what I want to do fairly quickly is just take my little pieces of paper towel and I'm just going to mop that up. So you might have a little bit of a stain stay on there, but if you do it quickly, and if I had even done it a little bit more quickly as soon as it started, I probably wouldn't have any stain left at all. So yeah, and then I'm just going to keep going. I want this to be nice and dark in the areas where I have the drips, so I can purposely get more paint on my brush, just really getting into the palette there and making sure that I get some nice rich color everywhere that those drips are occurring. And let that spread around. You can, if you want to, even create kind of artificially some shapes in here if you want to. So you already saw how, maybe I encouraged some extra drips where they weren't occurring naturally. So you don't want to necessarily do it too obviously, but if you wanted to, you could create some extra areas in there. You could even like paint a little shape and then have some drips go into that. All right, but that looks pretty cool. I like that kind of very natural look to it. If I want to really kind of play up the kind of chaotic nature of this, maybe I'm doing some splashing. Just be careful of your neighbor sitting next to you and have your paper towel ready to touch up your animal. So yeah, so you do want to make sure you've really done that oil pastel nice and thick so that it can withstand everything else you're going to do to it later. And if you get a little bit of color on there that you didn't want, not only can you lift it off most of it, but you could also go back in later and touch that up when it's dry with some other materials. All right, so now I've got my kind of fun look to this. I would just take this whole piece of cardboard over to the drying rack and put that on the lowest available area of the drying rack. We'll wait for this to dry, and then we can have some fun in these white areas, adding some Zentangle, or maybe we'll even just decide that this looks pretty cool just the way it is.